You ever have one of those nights where the air feels too heavy, even before anything happens? That was me last Friday. We were at this long mahogany table in the dining room of my wife's parents' house. The kind of room where you can smell old money and old grudges. Her dad, Charles, sat at the head, big guy, silver hair, that smug, country club kind of smile. My wife, Melissa, was to my right, tapping away at her phone like I wasn't even there. I'd been running Charles's company for 13 years. 13 years of killing myself. Late nights, weekends, missed birthdays. Turning his family's crumbling import business into an $85 million powerhouse. I had spreadsheets in my head instead of dreams. Dinner was halfway through. Steak, potatoes, some overpriced bottle of red wine. I was talking to Melissa's mom about expansion plans when Charles cleared his throat. Melissa looked up for the first time that night, her lipstick smeared in a way that made my gut twist before my brain caught up. Charles raised his glass. Well, after much thought, we've decided it's time for a change. I smiled, half proud, half confused. A change? Melissa leaned closer, still smiling. Yeah, she said, her voice sugar-coated poison. My new husband will be taking over the company now. There was this moment where I honestly thought she was joking. But no one laughed. Charles just kept that dead-eyed smile. Melissa stared straight at me, and suddenly my fork felt like it weighed 50 pounds. My what? I asked. My voice cracked, and I hated it. My new husband, she repeated slowly, like I was a child who couldn't follow. It's nothing personal. It's just time to move on. That was the moment the air went dead in my lungs. Everything I'd built, 13 years of loyalty, sweat, and sacrifice, was being handed over to some faceless guy I hadn't even met. And apparently my wife was already done with me. I didn't shout. I didn't slam the table. I just sat there while the taste of steak turned to ash in my mouth, every heartbeat like a drum in my ears. But the real knife came later that night when I realized Melissa didn't even wait until after I was gone to plan this. She'd been building this moment for months, maybe years. And the next morning, at work, I found something that made that dinner look like a warm-up that I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling while Melissa slept beside me like she had just finished a long day of whatever she'd been doing with her new husband. The faint smell of men's cologne, not mine, was still in the sheets. I told myself it was my imagination, but deep down I knew. By 5 a.m., I was dressed for work, tie a little too tight, mind running in jagged loops. I had to see the company. Not just because it was my creation, but because some part of me was hoping this was just a power play from Charles. Maybe Melissa was bluffing. Maybe this was their way of pressuring me into something. The office was quiet when I arrived. The security guard, Mike, gave me an odd look, pity in his eyes, but said nothing. I walked through the glass doors into my corner office, still dim in the early light. Everything was where I left it. Computer on, papers stacked neatly, the framed photo of me and Melissa at the company's 10-year anniversary gala sitting right next to my monitor. I picked it up, stared at it. Her smile in that photo was fake. I could see it now. I opened my laptop to check emails. That's when I saw it. An email thread, unread. Subject line, Weekend at the cabin, final plans. The sender's name I didn't recognize, Ethan Brooks, but the email was sent to Melissa's personal account. The thread had been forwarded to me accidentally. My stomach dropped. I clicked it. Ethan, can't wait to spend the whole weekend with you again. Last time was insane. I'm still thinking about you in that black dress and how fast it came off. Melissa, don't remind me. I almost screamed your name in the middle of dinner. He's so clueless, Ethan. This will all be over soon, and then we can be together without sneaking around. The company transfer is just the last step. Ethan, you sure he won't fight it? Melissa, no. He's loyal to a fault. He'll roll over. He always does. I swear my vision blurred. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely scroll. But I forced myself to keep reading. There were pictures. Melissa in our bed, wearing the silk robe I bought her for our anniversary. Ethan, shirtless, holding a glass of wine, his other hand on her thigh. Date stamped. Last week. It wasn't just betrayal, it was logistics. She had been planning to rip out my life in one clean, cold motion. First, the company. Then, the marriage. Then, me out of the picture entirely. I closed the laptop before I threw it across the room. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might black out. But then, something else happened. Something that made my skin crawl. The office phone rang. It was Charles. "Morning, son," he said in that fake friendly tone. "I wanted to give you a heads up. Ethan will be stopping by today to get a feel for the place before he officially takes over." Couldn't breathe. "Ethan?" I repeated, my voice flat. "Yes, Melissa's fiancé." He said it like he was talking about the weather. "Sharp young man. You'll get along fine." I hung up without saying goodbye. Fiancé. She wasn't just cheating. She was engaged to the guy. While still married to me. While I was still running the company. I felt my blood pressure spike. My jaw hurt from clenching it. All those late nights, all those sacrifices, all those years of defending her to my friends when they told me she was cold, distant, self-centered, and she had been laughing at me behind my back the whole time. Suddenly, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I turned, and there he was, Ethan. Early 30s, tall, clean-shaven, wearing a tailored suit that screamed paid for with my work. He smiled like we were old friends. "You must be Daniel," he said, offering his hand. "Melissa's told me so much about you." I didn't take his hand. I just stared at him, my nails digging into my palms. "Yeah," I said slowly. "I bet she has." In that moment, I knew the dinner was just the opening shot. The real war was starting now, and I wasn't going to roll over. Not this time. By the time I left the office that afternoon, my hand still carried the phantom weight of that email. I had replayed it in my mind at least 50 times. Every word Melissa wrote, every photo burned into the back of my eyelids. My drive home felt like it took years. Every red light was a cruel joke from the universe, daring me to cool down before I saw her. I didn't cool down. I walked into the house without taking my shoes off, slamming the door hard enough that the picture frames on the hallway wall rattled. Melissa was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a glass of white wine and a reality show blaring on the TV. She looked up, her face brightening for a fraction of a second before settling into that icy, bored expression she wore whenever she was forced to acknowledge my existence. "Hey," she said casually, like she wasn't gutting my life in slow motion. "Rough day." "Yeah," I said, stepping into the room. "Learned some interesting things today." She sipped her wine, unfazed. "Like what?" I didn't waste time. I pulled my phone out, opened the forwarded email, and tossed it onto the coffee table so it slid toward her. She glanced down at the screen, saw her own words staring back at her, and for a split second her jaw tightened. But she recovered fast. "That's private," she said flatly. "You had no right to look at that." I laughed. Actually laughed. "Private? Melissa, you were planning a whole new life with some guy named Ethan while you were still married to me. You're engaged to him." She rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic. "Oh, don't be so self-righteous. You've been married to your work for years. You gave me nothing but scraps of your time. Ethan actually sees me." "Sees you?" I barked. "Yeah, I saw how he sees you. In our bed, wearing the robe I bought you." She didn't even flinch. She set her wine glass down, leaned back, and smirked. "You're overreacting. These things happen. People move on." That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not just because she was cheating, but because she was treating me like I was some gullible idiot who should just quietly accept it. "These things happen?" I repeated slowly, stepping closer. "Melissa, I built your father's company into an $85 million empire. I gave you every damn thing you ever asked for, and you repay me by replacing me like a broken appliance." She shrugged. "The company isn't yours. It's my family's. And honestly, Daniel, you've gotten predictable. Ethan is exciting. He knows how to make me feel alive." I could feel my pulse in my neck. "And what exactly was your plan? String me along until the paperwork was signed, then toss me on the curb?" Her smirk deepened. "Pretty much. Why drag it out with a messy fight? I thought you'd be mature about it." Mature, I said, my voice rising. You lied to me, slept with another man, got engaged while still married to me, and plotted to take the company I bled for. And you want me to be mature about it? She stood now, folding her arms. Daniel, stop acting like you're some innocent victim. You put yourself in this position. You made work your first love. I just found someone who made me his first choice. I stared at her, searching for any sign of the woman I married 13 years ago. There was nothing, just a stranger in my wife's skin. A stranger who had no shame, no guilt, only calculation. You're unbelievable, I muttered. Thank you, she said, grabbing her wine glass and walking toward the kitchen like the conversation was over. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Because that's when I decided if she wanted war, I was done playing the nice guy. I wasn't just going to watch her burn my life to the ground. I was going to take back every single thing she thought she could steal from me. I didn't know how yet, but I knew this. Melissa had no idea what I was capable of when pushed to the edge. And she had just shoved me over it. The morning after the confrontation with Melissa, I woke up before sunrise, but this time it wasn't from shock. It was from a cold, sharp focus I hadn't felt in years. My marriage was over in every way that mattered, but the company. The company was still on the table. And if they thought they were going to rip that out of my hands without a fight, they were in for the nastiest surprise of their lives. I put on my best Navy suit, not the one I wore to board meetings, but the one I saved for investor pitches. Sent a message. I was here to play, and I was playing for keeps. When I walked into the office, the energy was different. People stopped talking when I passed. I darted away. A few whispered to each other like they were watching a man walk to his own execution. My assistant, Rachel, stood up the second she saw me. Daniel, we need to talk, she said in a low voice. I closed my office door behind us. What's going on? She hesitated, then handed me a printed memo. At the top, leadership transition, effective immediately. Below it was Charles's signature and Ethan's. I scanned the lines. They were stripping me of my role as CEO and giving Ethan the title of executive director. My new responsibilities included an advisory position with no decision-making power. It was dressed up in corporate politeness, but the truth was plain. I was being sidelined. Rachel kept her voice barely above a whisper. They had this ready yesterday afternoon. Ethan's already been making calls to suppliers. And, Daniel, he's in your office right now. I didn't wait another second. I walked down the hall, my shoes hitting the floor like war drums. When I opened my office door, there he was, Ethan. Leaning back in my chair, feet propped up on my desk, talking into my phone like he'd been there his whole career. He didn't even flinch when he saw me, just finished his call and hung up. Daniel, good to see you. I was just getting a feel for the space. Get your feet off my desk, I said, my voice flat and cold. He grinned like I was a kid throwing a tantrum. It's not really your desk anymore, is it? Just making myself comfortable. I stepped closer. You think you can walk in here, take my company, and… He cut me off, still smiling. Daniel, I'm not here to take anything from you. Melissa and I just think it's time for fresh leadership. You've done a great job, but sometimes things need new blood. I stared at him, my fists clenched. You mean her bloodline? He didn't deny it, just shrugged. Business and family. Sometimes they go hand in hand. I wanted to knock that smug expression clean off his face, but there was a camera in the corner of the room, and I wasn't going to hand them an easy way to make me look unstable. So I took a deep breath and leaned forward. You have no idea what you've just stepped into, Ethan. None. His smile faltered for just a second. Is that a threat? It's a promise, I said, turning to leave. Back in my office, my temporary office, according to the memo, I started making calls. Quiet calls. To the CFO I'd worked with for a decade. To the operations manager who knew every shipment, every supplier, every contract. To 3 board members who owed me favors. I didn't tell them everything yet, but I let them know I had concerns about the transition and that certain decisions might not be in the company's best interest. By noon, I had a meeting set for that evening with one of our oldest investors. The man had never liked Charles and barely tolerated Melissa. If I could get him on my side, I'd have leverage. But then the first curveball hit. Rachel came rushing into my office, pale and wide-eyed. "Daniel, HR just got an anonymous complaint about you. They're saying you've been misusing company funds for personal gain." I laughed bitterly. "Let me guess. Anonymous, but incredibly detailed?" She nodded. "They even have fake receipts. Melissa and Ethan weren't just trying to push me out, they were trying to bury me. A scandal like that would ruin my reputation in the industry." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. They thought they were ahead of me. They thought I'd just crumble under the weight of their lies. But they didn't know the full story yet. They didn't know that I had something Melissa would never want the world to see. And when the time was right, I was going to use it. That night, I didn't go home. I didn't want to see Melissa, didn't want to hear her voice, didn't want to watch her sipping wine while she plotted my erasure. Instead, I sat in the corner booth of a dim bar downtown, nursing a glass of bourbon while I made a different kind of plan. See, Melissa thought she knew everything about me. She thought I was the predictable, loyal husband who'd swallow humiliation because he wasn't a fighter. What she didn't know was that I'd been quietly keeping my own insurance for years. Not because I expected betrayal. God knows I never imagined she'd go this far. But because I'd learned early in business that leverage wasn't optional. And I had leverage. Plenty of it. I pulled my laptop from my bag and tethered it to my phone's hotspot. Logged into the private folder I'd been building since the early days of running the company. Inside was a collection of documents, emails, and financial statements that told a story Melissa and her father would never want public. It started with tax filings, some from as far back as my first year with the company. Charles had been creative with his accounting, funneling personal expenses through the business for decades. Private vacations disguised as international supply scouting. Renovations to his home written off as office improvements. But the real goldmine? Melissa's personal accounts. About 4 years ago, I noticed irregular transfers. Tens of thousands moving from the company's operational budget into a holding account Melissa managed. When I asked about it back then, she'd laughed it off, saying it was Charles moving money for tax purposes. I let it slide at the time, but I also made copies. Every single transaction, every falsified invoice. Then there was the kicker. An email chain between Melissa and a supplier in Singapore, arranging for a personal shipment of luxury items worth more than most people make in a year, paid for directly from the company. The shipment had been labeled as custom machinery parts on the official paperwork. It wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. If I handed this to the right journalist, Melissa and Charles would be fighting off federal investigators before they could finish their next bottle of wine. And Ethan? He'd be inheriting a smoking crater of a company instead of an empire. But I wasn't ready to go nuclear yet. A scorched earth move like that would end the game immediately, and I wanted them to sweat first. I wanted Melissa to feel the same knot in her stomach I'd been carrying since that dinner. I started by calling David Price, a lawyer I'd worked with on some high-stakes acquisitions. The man was a shark, calm, efficient, and absolutely merciless when his clients were wronged. I gave him a brief overview of the situation, leaving out Ethan's name for now. "Daniel," he said after a long pause, "what you've got here isn't just grounds for a corporate coup. It's a legal hammer. You could take them both down and still keep control of the company." "That's the plan," I said. "But not yet. I want them to think they've won before I flip the table." David chuckled. "Careful. People like your wife, they don't go down quietly. You corner her, she'll try to bite her way out." "I'm counting on it," I said, and hung up. By midnight, I was at my apartment downtown, the one I'd kept since before the marriage. Melissa had always hated it, called it a sad little bachelor's cave. Tonight, it felt like a war room. I spread the files across the table, sorting them into piles. Financial crimes, corporate fraud, personal misconduct. Each pile was a loaded gun. Around 1 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Unknown, "We should talk. I know what Melissa's up to. Meet me tomorrow, 10 a.m., 5th and Main. Don't tell anyone. I stared at it for a long time. No name. No hint of who it was. Could have been a trap. Could have been an ally. At this point, I was willing to gamble. Because one thing was clear. Melissa wasn't the only one playing games. And if someone else had a score to settle, maybe it was time to start forming my own team. The next morning, I parked my car half a block from the corner of 5th and Main. It was one of those windy, gray mornings that made the city feel colder than it was. People hurried past with their heads down, and I stood there scanning faces, wondering who the hell had sent me that text. At exactly 10 a.m., a woman in a black coat approached. Late 30s, sharp eyes, and the kind of controlled posture that screamed she didn't waste time. She stopped a few feet away from me. "Daniel?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "That depends. You the one who texted me?" She gave the faintest smile. "Name's Claire. I used to work for your wife's father. Until about 3 months ago." I studied her face. She didn't flinch. "Used to. Let's just say Charles doesn't like people asking too many questions about the books." She pulled a slim folder from her bag and handed it to me. "I've been watching what's been going on. You're about to get steamrolled, and I don't like watching good people get chewed up." I opened the folder right there on the sidewalk. Inside were bank statements, internal memos, and, most damning, an email from Charles to Melissa, dated just 2 weeks ago. "Once Ethan's in position, we'll liquidate quietly. The board doesn't need to know the details until it's done. By then, Daniel will be history." Liquidate. That meant they weren't just taking the company from me. They were planning to sell it off for parts, cash out, and leave everyone else in the dust. The employees I'd fought to keep through recessions, the clients who trusted me. All collateral damage. Claire leaned in closer. "I've seen people get destroyed by them. I'm not interested in watching it happen again. You want to fight back? I've got more where that came from." "Why help me?" I asked. Her eyes darkened. "Because Melissa did the same thing to my sister. Different man, same game. She uses people until they're empty, then tosses them aside. You're not the first, Daniel. But I'd like you to be the last." I slipped the folder into my briefcase. "All right, you're in. But this stays between us. If Melissa or Charles catch a whiff of you helping me, they'll come for you too." Claire smirked. "Let them try." We parted ways quickly, two strangers on a busy corner. I drove straight to my apartment, spread out her documents next to mine, and began connecting the dots. Claire had the missing pieces. She'd kept records of phone calls between Melissa and an offshore account manager. There were invoices for consulting services from companies that didn't exist. It was a full-scale fraud operation, and I was now sitting on proof of it all. But the real gem? A hidden deed transfer showing Melissa's name on a property in the Bahamas, purchased through a shell corporation that traced right back to Charles's personal trust. I sat back, staring at the papers. Melissa had been building her escape hatch for years, making sure that when she cut me loose, she'd already have her paradise waiting. The anger in me hardened into something sharper. This wasn't just about a cheating wife anymore. This was about two people who thought they could strip me of everything I'd built, steal millions, and sail off into the sunset laughing. My phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Rachel at the office. "Rachel, urgent. Ethan just called an emergency meeting with the senior team. Says it's about transition planning. They're shutting you out completely." Perfect. They wanted to play power games? I'd give them a show. I called Claire. "You still have access to the old internal email archive?" "Every last byte," she said. "Good. I need you to find anything that connects Ethan directly to the fraud. If we can tie him in, it's not just Melissa and Charles going down. It's him too." She paused, then said, "Give me 48 hours. I knew that tone, she'd get it done. And when she did, I'd be holding the kind of evidence that didn't just end careers, it ended people's ability to walk into a boardroom ever again." As I hung up, a thought hit me. If Melissa could blindside me at a family dinner, maybe it was time I returned the favor. But I wouldn't do it in private. No, I'd do it in front of the people whose respect she craved most. 2 days later, I walked into the conference room with the kind of calm that made people nervous. Ethan had called for a special leadership session with the senior management team, and from the smug grin on his face as I entered, he thought this was going to be another humiliation for me. He was in my old chair at the head of the table, Melissa beside him, wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my first car. Charles sat at the far end, his arms folded, eyes scanning the room like a general before battle. The rest of the senior team was there: Rachel, the CFO, the head of operations, 2 board members. They all glanced at me as I took my seat near the middle, some with sympathy, others with that wary, "Don't pull me into this" look. Ethan cleared his throat. "Thanks for coming, everyone. As you know, we're in the middle of a critical leadership transition. Today we'll be outlining our vision for the future of the company and discussing a few procedural changes." Melissa leaned forward, flashing her trademark fake smile. "We want to make sure everyone's on the same page moving forward. Change can be uncomfortable, but we're confident this will be for the best." I waited until Ethan had droned on for a few minutes about new operational strategies before I set my leather briefcase on the table with a heavy thunk. The sound cut through his monologue like a blade. "Sorry to interrupt," I said evenly, "but before we talk about the future, I think we need to discuss the past and the present." Ethan gave me a condescending smile. "Daniel, we've already explained." I held up a hand. "No, you've explained nothing. You've just assumed I'd step aside quietly. But I think the rest of the team deserves to know exactly what kind of leadership they're getting." Melissa's eyes narrowed, but I could see the faintest flicker of worry. Charles leaned forward, frowning. I opened the briefcase, pulled out a thick folder, and spread its contents across the table. Bank statements, fake invoices, email printouts, and right in the center, the deed to that Bahamian property in Melissa's name. "This," I said, tapping the papers, "is a small sample of the financial activities that have been going on under the leadership of Charles and, more recently, Melissa. Offshore accounts, falsified invoices, personal expenses routed through company funds. And, as of recently, discussions about liquidating the company without informing the board or the senior management team." The CFO's head shot up. "Liquidating?" Ethan tried to laugh it off. "This is ridiculous. You can't just throw around accusations." I cut him off by sliding a printed email across the table toward the CFO. "Recognize this address? It's Melissa's, and that's yours, Ethan. Talking about your cut of the liquidation." The color drained from his face. Melissa's jaw tightened. Charles's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "I have copies of every document," I continued, my voice steady. "And if anything happens to me, or if these games continue, those copies go to the press, the authorities, and every client we've ever worked with." The room was dead silent. Rachel was staring at the papers like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The board members exchanged looks. Melissa finally spoke, her voice sharp. "You're bluffing." I smiled coldly. "Am I? Go ahead, Melissa. Call the Bahamian property manager and ask if your name's still on the deed. Ask Charles if he wants the IRS to see his office renovation receipts from 2015. Or better yet, ask Ethan if he wants the Department of Justice poking around his offshore transfers." Ethan was sweating now, actual beads forming at his hairline. The head of operations cleared his throat. "If this is real, and I'm not saying it is, then this isn't just a leadership issue. This is criminal exposure for the entire company." "That's exactly right," I said, "and I'm willing to make sure the company survives. But it won't survive under them." One of the board members leaned forward. "Daniel, what exactly are you proposing?" I looked directly at Melissa. "I get my position back. I run the company without interference. Charles steps back completely. Ethan is gone. In exchange, I keep this information in-house. For now." Melissa's lips curled into something between a snarl and a laugh. "You think you can blackmail us?" "No," I said, locking eyes with her. "I'm saving the company from you." For the first time since this nightmare began, the balance in the room shifted. The smug certainty in her eyes flickered into something else. Calculation, maybe even fear. And I knew I'd just put the first real crack in her armor. The meeting ended in chaos. Ethan tried to joke his way through it, but his voice cracked. Melissa didn't say another word, just sat there with her nails tapping the table, eyes darting between the board members like she was calculating escape routes. Charles muttered something about needing to confer privately and stormed out, his face the color of raw meat. By the time I left the conference room, I knew I had them on the ropes. But close wasn't enough. I wasn't looking for a stalemate. I wanted an ending. 2 days later, I got my chance. The board scheduled an emergency session to address governance concerns. Officially, I wasn't supposed to be there. Unofficially, I had Rachel slip me the time and location. When I walked into that room, I didn't just bring my documents. I brought Claire. She had the final piece. An audio recording of Melissa and Ethan talking in her father's office about transferring millions out of the company before the sale. Ethan, in his infinite stupidity, bragged about how easy it would be once the dead weight, me, was gone. We played the recording right there in front of the board. Ethan's voice oozed arrogance, Melissa's laughter sharp and cold. When the part about making sure Daniel walks away with nothing played, I watched the CFO's jaw lock in disgust. "This," I said when the audio ended, "is who you're putting in charge. And if you think clients, partners, and the media won't hear it, you're wrong. I'll see to it personally." Melissa tried to talk. "This is taken out of context." "No," Claire cut in, her voice like a blade. "It's exactly in context. I worked for your father. I saw the fraud. I saw the transfers. You didn't just plan to betray Daniel. You planned to gut this company and leave everyone else holding the bag." The boardroom went silent. One of the older members, a man who'd been with the company since Charles founded it, finally spoke. "Effective immediately, I'm calling for a vote to remove Melissa from any position of authority. Ethan as well." It was unanimous. Charles wasn't even there. He'd apparently fallen ill that morning, though I suspected his absence was strategic. Didn't matter. His influence was dead the moment those documents hit the table. When the vote ended, Melissa stood, her face pale but her voice dripping venom. "You think this is over, Daniel? You think you've won?" I stood too, calm and deliberate. "Melissa, this isn't a game. You could have had everything: respect, stability, loyalty, but you chose greed. And now you have nothing." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She grabbed her bag, turned sharply, and walked out, Ethan scurrying behind her like a kicked dog. After they left, the board formally reinstated me as CEO. They even asked me to take a larger stake in the company to ensure stability. I agreed with one condition. I wanted full authority to audit every corner of the operation. They didn't hesitate. That night, I went back to my apartment. For the first time in weeks, I felt the tightness in my chest ease. But there was no rush of victory, no celebration. Just a strange quiet. Melissa didn't call. She didn't text. I knew she wouldn't. Her type doesn't apologize. They rewrite history in their heads until they're the victim. I didn't care. She was out of my life, and that was enough. In the days that followed, I heard rumors. Melissa had tried to cash in some offshore assets, only to find accounts frozen. Ethan was exploring other opportunities, which was corporate speak for no one would touch him. Charles? Word was he was under quiet investigation for tax fraud. None of it surprised me. People asked me if I felt bad. The truth? No. They'd tried to bury me. All I'd done was refuse to stay in the grave they dug. I learned something in all this: betrayal doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow leak, 1,000 tiny cracks you ignore until the whole thing caves in. I'd been blind to Melissa's cracks for years, thinking loyalty could patch them. But loyalty is wasted on people who see it as a weakness. If anyone asked me for advice now, I'd tell them this: protect yourself. In business, in marriage, in life, keep something that's yours alone. Not because you expect betrayal, but because if it comes, you'll need a way to stand when everything else is falling apart. And if someone does betray you, don't just survive. Make sure they regret it. Because in the end, I didn't just get my company back. I got myself back.